Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to Kapowski Reads, and this is my February wrap-up. I gave myself a bunch of reading intentions for February and I am really quite chuffed with myself that I managed to read all of the books that I planned to read this month, plus a bunch more, because I got through 16 books in February, which is wild. Especially when you consider that it is the tiniest month of the year. So I don't know how I managed that, but here we are. So I suppose I'm just gonna go through what I read and what I thought about it. Once I've gone through the books that I read, I'm gonna share what my kind of goals are for March. That's pretty much my plan for this video. I hope you enjoy. So to start off, I actually read a non-fiction book. I love non-fiction, but I just feel like I haven't had any time for it lately, and that kind of made me a little bit sad. So I made time for some non-fiction in February. I read The Year of Less by Kate Flanders. It was fine. It's just the blurb on the back of the physical book is not really what the book is about. The blurb on Goodreads is far more accurate, and if the physical book had that blurb on it when I bought it, I probably wouldn't have bought it. So next up I had what I'm just gonna classify as a bunch of rereads. They are all books that I have read and loved before, and spoiler, I read and loved them again. I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was part of an Instagram based read along, and the weirdest thing happened where week one, when we were supposed to chat about the book, the page that had organised the read along was just gone, and I had a friend who was doing the same read along and we had absolutely no idea what was going on because there was no longer a read along. Very strange, but either way I continued reading this book. I still enjoyed it. It is hilarious. I always forget how witty Jane Austen's writing is. It was so funny and just a really still an enjoyable read, and I'm probably going to reread it again another time and still like it. I also reread The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I still love this book. It's still a 5-star book for me. Pride and Prejudice I gave 4 stars. I still love the sort of deep descent into Esther's mental health, the treatment that was available at the time, and just sort of seeing how things have changed between then and now, and they've not really changed that much, or as much as you would hope, but there's just something about The Bell Jar that I just find so comforting, and this is a book that I reread regularly, so I'm gonna reread it again another time, but for now I still love it and it still holds a very special place in my heart. Next up was my Read Christie 2022 pick for February, which was Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. I have made a video about this book where I basically review the book. Spoiler, I love it, 5 stars for me. But I also review this book and relate it to the new film adaptation. So if that's something that you're interested in, I will pop the link for that into the description. But this book was just such a clever little mystery, and I've read it so many times before and it impresses me every single time because the more I read it, the more I know what I'm looking for, and I just don't see any of the hints, and I just think it's so clever and just so well done. It is, I'll say it every time, one of my favourite Agatha Christie books, and I will read it again another time and I'm sure I will love it just as much. So I think it's time to move into the books that I haven't read before. Let's talk about new things. I'm going to start with my 2-star reads, and kicking that off I read Meet the Baumgartners by Selena Kitt. This was an ebook. It was a novella, a very short novella, and I wasn't expecting that. This was just a short erotica and I thought perfect for February, you know, romance month. I felt there was quite almost no real plot to it. which kind of disappointed me a bit because it was all about the sexy times, and that's, if you know, great if that's what you were looking for in a book, but I kind of wanted some plot in between my sexy times, which didn't really happen. So it was an okay book, but I'm probably not going to continue with the series. My next 2-star read was more 2.5, but I just couldn't justify to myself giving it 3 stars, so I've settled on 2, and I'm feeling pretty confident with my 2, and that was Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. I have been reading this book since September. The reason I'm giving this a 2-star is because I didn't expect it to be quite so much literally just Twilight from Edward's point of view. There was barely anything new in it, so it sort of felt a bit like I read this before, and there were parts where it should have been really exciting and thrilling and tense because, you know, there was danger. But I've read the series and I know what happens to all of the characters that were in this book. I know who is okay and I know who is not, and I know what happens to them. So for me, it kind of felt like there were no real stakes because I knew what was going to happen, and I liked having things from Edward's point of view, but he was really creepy. Creepier than I remember, but it just felt like I wasn't getting anything new. And I don't know why this book had to be so long, but it was, and I'm really happy that I have finished this because it feels like I finished reading this, which was a series that I was reading with my sister who passed away in 2013, so she never got to read this book, so I wanted to finish it for both of us because we read the series together, and I'm really happy that I have finished it. And the last of my 2-star reads was the Panopticon by Jenni Fagan, which was one of my Reading Scottish books. My last video was my Reading Scottish wrap-up where I do talk about all of my Scottish books in a bit more detail, so I'll just be really quick about them in this video and put the link in the description for the Reading Scottish wrap-up if you would like to watch that and maybe hear a little bit more about my feelings on the books. For me, this book was just quite a distressing read, which was why I didn't enjoy it that much. It was very dark, and of course the subject matter is not, you know, light and fluffy. I found it quite upsetting to read. Maybe I'm just an overly sensitive soul. Moving on to 3 stars, which is a much more happy place to be. I only had 1 3-star read in February, so, you know, not too bad. And that was Speak Easy, a Kate March mystery by Laurie Adams. And this was an arc, and this book just oozed 1920s. It was set in the 1920s, and it was just so really well researched. One of those books where a lot of stuff happens and I go and Google to just be like, oh, what was that? And the author definitely done their research, and lots of, you know, events matched time-wise, and that's just something I really enjoy in a book, when, you know, historical events or people from history are mentioned, and when you look it up you're like, oh yeah, the timings match. That, you know, it keeps me in the fantasy. And the format of this book was something that I have never really experienced before, where each chapter started with Kate being in prison, being interviewed, and the way that she answers all of the questions is through a flashback. So the chapter starts and then just takes us back and sort of takes the reader for an adventure where you can see exactly what happened. And I thought that that was really refreshing because I've never read anything like that before. My favourite part of this book was actually the cameo played by Max Factor of Max Factor makeup fame. And I didn't know Max Factor was a person, and I learned something new from this book. Moving on to my 4-star reads. There are a lot of 4-star reads. I had a really good month. First up was All You Need Is Love by Sarah Robertson. This was another arc, and I wanted to read this because February, I wanted to read a cute romance, and this was a cute romance. It was a novella. It was a really quick read. I read it in an evening and it was sort of my favourite romance trope, which is grumpy sunshine. I love the sort of joyful, whimsical character falling in love with a grumpy person, and it was just so sweet and I really enjoyed it. And I finally got around to reading Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I saw this book all over Bookstagram and Booktube in, I don't know, December, November. It feels like it was 8 months ago, and I bought it because of course I did, and I didn't get around to reading it until this month, and I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. I was sort of on the fence about where to rank this because it was more of a 4.5, but I didn't quite feel it was a 5, but it's definitely on the higher end of 4. I forgot that this book was part of a series, and I was so annoyed at myself for reading it before the second book is out because I want to read the second book now, and it doesn't exist yet. I think the second book is out in maybe September. I'm so gutted to have to wait that long because I really want to find out what happens next. I just love the sheer chaos that Jax brought to this book. This was just a whimsical adventure. The world building was just excellent. I want to go to the Great North. It just sounds magical. And I want to drink the every flavoured, fantastic flavoured water that actually sounds a little bit gross when they describe what they taste like. But everything about this book was just whimsy and just fairy tale, and just, it was a joyful book to read. It was definitely what I wanted, but also what I needed at the time. I am a huge fan of fairy tale retellings or fairy tale inspired books, or just books that write their own fairy tale, and for me this definitely was an amazing fairy tale. I'm going to talk about my next 2 books together because they're both Scottish reads and they're both kind of related, and they were The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark and Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Vampire Menace by Olga Wojtas. And I had read the previous Miss Blaine's Prefect book and it referenced The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie so much that I sort of, well, I told myself I wasn't going to read The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And it turns out I was lying to myself because I read it and I loved this book. It was referenced so much in the last Miss Blaine's Prefect book that I read it, and I hoped that it would help me to better understand this series, and it did, it really did. The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is a Scottish classic. I had never read it before and it exceeded my expectations so much. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the way that it was written. I feel that by reading The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, I actually get the characters a little bit better in Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Vampire Menace, because I have a much better understanding of Shona McMonagall, the protagonist in the series, and this book. And the Vampire Menace was just an absolutely hilarious read. It was so silly and it was just chaos, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I laughed out loud, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next book in the series. I also read Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. This was my 4th read by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia, and the 4th time I have loved one of their books. I think it's safe to say that they are definitely an auto-buy author for me now, because this book was just, it was vampires, but not vampires as I know them, and it was just gritty noir, and that's just something that it turns out I love in a book. I love fluffy, whimsical, joyful books, and I love noir. Who knew? This book was full of vampire politics, which is something that I really enjoy, and I love the unexpected friendship between the main characters. And I have noticed that when I read books by this author, I want a very specific kind of ending, and the author gives me something quite different to what I want, but when I read it I'm like, yeah, turns out you know what you're doing better than I do. And their endings are always just the they feel like the right kind of ending, if that makes sense. I also I'm feeling very proud of myself this month because I also made a little bit of progress with my series. I added to my ongoing series by reading Once Upon a Broken Heart, but I made progress because I read Wyrd Sisters by Terry Pratchett, which is the second book in the Witches series, which I am hoping to have finished in 2022. I have now read 2. That's progress, so I'm confident that that'll maybe get done, but who knows. And I love this book. I am really, really enjoying this series. This was just so witty, and it makes so many references to Shakespeare, which of course it's got the witches. Shakespeare, that makes sense. But I just found that so clever. This book was just so fun because of all of the witches got a lot more book time. There were no wizards, and I think I much prefer when the books are about the witches. It felt really quite exciting to read because there were stakes in this book, and I haven't read any more of the series, so I didn't know what was going to happen, and I just sort of felt hooked. I loved the little ghosties in this. There were so many ghosts and they were just really funny. I also loved the cat. I am a huge fan of cats, so if you put them in a book, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm also a sucker for a sweet little romance, which this book had a little bit of, and that was something that I really did enjoy. I've got the whole series of witches books downstairs in this gorgeous, gorgeous hardback version, so I will be reading the next 4, I think, at some point, but I am excited to continue to do so. Moving on to my 5-star reads, I met my goal and I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh, which I have been meaning to read for months. I finally got around to reading it and I loved this book. I did not like the main character, but I did feel sympathy towards her. The unnamed main character was sort of the epitome of the, poor little rich girl, but I did feel for her, and I thought this book was really quite fascinating and really interesting to read. Her therapist was just, oh, no, you shouldn't be a therapist. Stick to massage that she moved on to, but it was, it made for such an enjoyable story, and I didn't actually expect this book to have so many moments of comedy, which was unexpected. This book reminded me a little bit of The Bell Jar, which is one of my favourite books, and it wasn't the same. They were very different books, but they sort of covered the same sort of descent into a mental health spiral. Obviously for the protagonist in My Year of Rest and Relaxation, it was kind of different because she was already there, whereas in The Bell Jar she sort of descends a little bit. There's more of a descent, really. I just found this book so compelling and I wanted to continue reading it, and I'm so happy that I did because I thought this book was just excellent, and I am gonna have to look up more books by this author because I would love to read more of their stuff. And my final book that I read in February, which is also my book recommendation of the month that nobody asked for, and that is A Glasgow Kiss by Sophie Gravia. This book was absolutely laugh out loud hilarious. I cackled reading this. I didn't just laugh, I cackled like a mad woman, and I loved this book. It was so funny. It was filthy. It was so dirty. The sex scenes were so smutty, but it was so funny, and it was supposed to be funny. Like, I'm not just laughing at a book that isn't expecting me to laugh at it. So it was hilarious, it was smart, it was smutty, and it had some beautiful, beautiful friendships in it. I also found it super relatable with the relationship between Zara and her friends. It was just such a fun read. I want to go back and read it again so I can tab all of the bits that made me howl with laughter, so that when I'm having a sad time, I'm gonna go back, read them again, chuckle. I recommend this book so much, so highly. Yeah, I love this book. So those are the books that I read in February, and my favourite book of the month. I would love if you would share your favourite book of the month down below in the comments. And now I'm gonna move on to my reading intentions for March. First up, I have a couple of book club books. For my real life book club, I need to read The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. And this is such a super short book, so I'm quite excited about that, because I think the last few book club books we've had have been not super long, but you know, 400 pages or so. So to have just a novella is quite interesting. So I'm kind of excited to read this to see just how much happens in such a short number of pages. I also have my Read Christie 2022 book, which is After the Funeral by Agatha Christie. And I have read this book before, but it's been a really long time since I've read it. So I'm really excited to go back and revisit. I also quite like the idea of reading a classic every month. So I'm going to try to continue that. At this moment, I'm now wondering if I read a classic in January, or if it was just February that I started deciding I was gonna read more classics. Who knows? I am planning to reread 1984 by George Orwell, and I used to have a physical copy of just 1984, which is the last book in this giant collection of George Orwell stories. I am also hoping to continue reading some non-fiction, because I really enjoyed reading my non-fiction last month, and I'm planning and hoping to read Embrace Your Wyrd by Felicia Day. I love Felicia Day, I just think she's so fun, and I bought this book on pre-order. It came out in 2019 and I haven't read it, and I know why I haven't read it, because I was going to read it and then I saw a review that said that there's part of the book that tells you to rip out a page, and that filled me with the fear. So I thought, no, I'm not going to read that just now. But now that I think about it, if I'm being told to rip out a page in a book, then that page exists to be ripped out, and I feel better about it now. So I am really looking forward to reading this, because I like the idea of embracing my weird. I've been doing it since 1986, so let's continue with that. I'm also intending to read one of my newest books, because if you've seen my 22 in 2022 video, I have a really bad habit of buying new books and not reading them at the time. So I plan to read The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, which I pre-ordered. So I'm planning to read a book that I have pre-ordered in the year that I bought it, which I think is an admirable goal. I don't have any faith in myself for continuing this throughout the year, but it's nice to have dreams. I also feel so unbelievably lucky, because I asked for an advanced reader's copy of the next Miss Blaine's Prefect book, and I got it! So I'm going to be reading Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Wyrd Sisters by Olga Wojtas. I just read the second book in February, and this is the third book, and I'm so excited to be able to just continue on to the next one. Those are my goals for March. I think they're pretty achievable. If you've made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know if you have any reading goals for March. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!